What is up? Welcome to this special episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and I say that today is a special episode because this is a brilliant branding mind that I've been so excited to talk to. I am so excited to be joined for today's episode by Ann Gillaspie. She is incredible at what she does, and one of the things that she lists that she does incredibly well for her clients and with her clients is she asks great questions. So obviously you have heard from so many different branding agencies and all the content that you consume about entrepreneurship, but Ann is really gonna bring some knowledge bombs to us today through the way that she looks at branding. So to tell you a little bit about Ann, she is the founder of Fix and Form, where she helps businesses imagine, create, and deliver exceptional brand experiences that audiences and customers crave. As a bonus, she also teaches businesses and their employees, entrepreneurs, how to do it themselves as well, which is why I really dig Ann's approach. Her work and the work of this agency isn't just about fixing brands and hoping for the best. She really loves reigniting the world of customer relationships and truly forming the industry through education, one flawless brand at a time. I've been so excited about today's conversation, and now I'm excited for you to tune in and to hear my interview with Ann Gillaspie. Hey, Ann, you heard your bio. I'm honestly so excited that you're here today. I feel a little pressure to be asking you the right questions, but either way, welcome to the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast.
Hey, Brian, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Heck yeah. So obviously I read your bio, but I always love inviting guests. Fill in the gaps. I know there's a lot more to you. You're a mom. You're in Colorado. Tell listeners, who the heck is Ann?
That's a loaded question. Thanks for that one. It's hard, I think, when you are looking through the years of motherhood and you're trying to also have a career and have something for your mind to work on that isn't just raising kids. And so for me, I've been so blessed and I'm so grateful that I had this business because I knew years ago I wanted that. I knew that I wanted that through my years of motherhood and raising kids. We have three. They're 3, 5, and 7. And I just feel like the work that I get to do in addition to that is so fulfilling.
And 3, 5, and 7, I've got twin niece and nephews. They are 5 years old right now, and I know how much of a handful they are. It sounds to me like you started your business after you already became a mom. Is that correct? And what drove you to that decision, as if you didn't have enough on your plate?
No, that is not. It's interesting that it comes off that way. I actually started my business 9 years ago in 2014, and it was right after we had moved for fun from Denver, where I was born and raised, to Austin, Texas. And in that big transition of our lives, it felt right and the moment was right to start my own business. So before we had started thinking of a family, we were currently in the early years of marriage thinking that we were going to have kids. So before we did that, I started my own business. And thankfully, because that first year of business ownership and startup is so grueling and hard that I think the dedication and focus for me anyway at that time of my life, I needed to not have kids.
Yeah, I definitely feel you on that. And it's an entrepreneurial story that I hear so much. And I love that part of your story. At least you had those first couple years to get up and running. Take us back to those times, because obviously kids introduce a lot of other time management complications. But I want you to take us way back. Tell us about your first few clients.
Oh my gosh, I have to remember them. I come from a very corporate background. I studied business marketing and acting and directing in school, and I had a lot of theater background. And for me, I always knew that I wanted to be more business and then a lot of the entertainment side on the side. So going through the early years of my career and that first kind of decade in your 20s, it was all marketing, advertising, and then I really got into the brand side of things. And when I chose to leave the company that I was working with at the time, Austin, and the move to Austin was a really big game changer for us in the mix of also leaving that company. And I really didn't have anything lined up. So the first few months, I was planning to just kind of take a siesta and work on some personal time, work on the house that we were building in Austin, and just kind of regroup, if you will, on what the next future for my career held. And what was really beautiful about Austin and the market there was the people who we met and the people who fostered and supported this idea of me starting my own business, which my old boss actually told me one day, you should be a business owner, and you will be. And I said, oh, heck no, I don't ever want to own a business. Are you nuts? And sure enough, he was one of the first phone calls I made and said, look, I started my own company. And he said, yeah, I know. I figured you would. So the first grueling months of business ownership were just awful. I mean, taxes, legalities, all of the formation that you have to know, the operation piece. I had to learn so much. There were nights that I was working well into 4 a.m. And just when you're onto something and you get so close to figuring it out as a business owner, and then you do, there is nothing more gratifying than saying, wow, heck yes, I learned that. I dominated that. Now I know how to do it. So those were a lot of the early days. And some of the early clients, this business has always been referral only. And that's also such a beautiful thing. I haven't done lead generation, marketing. It's just been referral and word of mouth. And that's the way I like to work, because I'm in the business of relationships and building those. So the very first year, it was clients based off of my networking and my relationship building with partner businesses in Austin, who I was meeting through friends. I was meeting at the dog park. I was meeting at networking events, and so on. And then it just grew from there. So it was a lot of startups. It was a lot of the incubators down there, thinking that the startup culture was where I wanted to be. And it certainly now has evolved past that.
Heck yeah. Listeners, already Anne is giving you clues about her success. Listen there. It wasn't fancy marketing tactics. It wasn't building complex funnels. It started and continues to be driven on relationships and connections. So Anne, I love that part of your story. One thing that I really love is that you already dropped the B word on us. You already said brands, and that you help when it comes to branding. And here's the thing, Anne, as a podcast host, I never want to host boring episodes. And I feel like anytime you tune into a business episode or a podcast about branding, people always say, a brand is not just a logo, it's not just colors. And obviously you and I both feel that way, but I'll tell you from the outside looking in at your work, I love what you do at Fix and Form is that right on your website, the very first thing, and we're going to talk about your website, listeners should totally go there, fixandform.com, but right on your website, you write, you walk into your favorite restaurant, before you're even seated at your table, the full experience has begun. And to me, looking in from the outside, it sounds like you view a brand as way more than just those things, but also as an experience. I love that. Talk to us about what a brand is to you.
I love this question. It's great. The opening line of the website is really to get your mind in thinking of a story. And so I'm in the business of storytelling, and that's why my minor of acting and directing really plays well into my work, because I do a lot of character defining. I do a lot of persona building. If you think about a business or a brand like you would a person or a character, you're coming up with the narrative of their backstory, why they exist, why those owners and founders are doing what they're doing, and why they're bringing that work your way. So if you think about branding is really creating that experience. If you think about something that's tangible, that can be delivered in a space like a restaurant with food, like an apparel company with products in a store, like a tech store with computers and gadgets, if you want to go buy all of that in person. That whole thing is a brand experience. And the ones who do it well have put time and effort into what I do. It's the step one. It's creating the brand foundation and those building blocks to really connect all of the why and the storytelling of what that business's persona and character should be delivering. And so without that, you get the brands and the companies that are just meh. And I even use that word on my website, meh, M-E-H, because there's so many brands out there that are missing this step one. In fact, that's making up a lot of my client work now is rebrands. I'm working with clients who have been doing what they do for 20 plus years, saying, look, Anne, we've never even thought about this. We've never even met anybody who's asked us about this, nor did we even put this together ourselves, because we kind of fell into what we're doing. And we realized that to grow and to connect now in a post-COVID world, we need the why. We need to be connecting with people on a human level. And that's what I do.
Yeah, I love that answer, particularly because a little nugget that you said in there shows that there's so much intention behind a brand. You're right. A lot of business owners, entrepreneurs, we're all guilty at one point or another of saying, well, yeah, I hadn't thought of it. And these things don't happen by mistake. So I love that aspect to your work. But, and I've got to ask you the big question for all the social media agency owners out there, or maybe a marketing consulting agency who they're sitting there thinking, well, yeah, the local pizza restaurant, they've got a story about their grandmother from Italy, and you can smell the pizza and you can taste the pizza. What's sexy about my business? What's my story? How am I supposed to build a brand behind just providing a service for my clients?
Right? I know. So a lot of that hard work is involved of what is sexy about this? What can we put in here that's intriguing? And that comes from personal connection. I just finished one of my strategy sessions with a startup founder, and she got into so many amazing stories about her grandma and her parents and how she was raised and how she and her husband met and how together the two of them are doing what they're doing in this work. And I think that to people who are starting businesses and startups, you don't think that that matters in your business, right? We always think, well, let's separate church and state here. Let's keep my business and my personal life far away from each other. And in fact, it's the opposite. It should be connecting that person and the characteristics of it. So if you take a social media marketing agency and you take, somebody who's offering like a SaaS service, you're like, okay, not very, very sexy about this stuff. You get into these conversations and these questions that I do in my work of these strategy sessions. It's almost like business therapy at this point. And we talk about things in these sessions that get really personal. And sometimes when people connect with me and they get to that trusting level, which they have to do fairly quickly, and that's something that's a really great skill set of mine, I've learned over the years to kind of get in and connect with someone really fast right away on an honest and just high integrity level. And people love that. And when you do, they feel safe to share things with you like they would a therapist. And so we take the stories of them. We take the stories of the people who are running the ship of that social media agency. And that's what makes it more connecting and sometimes more sexy. And oftentimes these companies aren't sexy and they don't have to be, but they have to have all these other skill sets and brand descriptors, as I like to call them, that we usually come up with in these brand audits, 5 or 6 words, adjectives that you use everywhere to describe the business. And that gives that cohesive tone everywhere that you're using the same words. And that often comes from getting a deep dive in with the founders.
Yeah, in that case, I really enjoy how you talk about blending. You use the illustration of separation of church and state. And as a political junkie, I love the way that you use that analogy. But it's something that I faced, particularly early on in my 20s, is I didn't understand how to blend those two. And I actually, for a large part of my entrepreneurial journey early on, I thought that they did have to be separate. And if people go back and listen to episode 1 of this podcast, you'll hear me trying to sound like, quote unquote, a podcast host. I'm boring, I'm monotone, I'm not me. Whereas here we are almost 600 episodes later. And the more I inject of me into Wantrepreneur, the more we grow. But Anne, along the way, one of the big questions that I found myself asking, and trust me, reading our podcast inbox, I know a lot of listeners relate to this, is that early on you don't know, should I operate under a business name? Should I be doing things under my name? Am I a personal brand? Am I some sort of corporate looking company? How do you help people flesh those things out? Because they are big fundamental questions.
Brian, I'm doing that right now with a client. This is such a relevant question for me. So we are discussing. She's been operating in a business under her name for years, and she has that reputation behind her. And so at this point, she doesn't want to give all of that up. So what our first session is going to be doing is taking a deep dive into conversation and Q&A that I do of probing why. What is the connection that you have with your name? And is there space to ditch that? And if there isn't space to ditch that, and if there's negative feelings about rebranding and creating some type of businessy, corporate-y name around it, then we need to honor those negative feelings and discuss why, and maybe go back to just having her name be it. Or we take a spin-off of her first and last name, or just the last name, and then add another word to it. and kind of create a business name off of that. And the greatest model of that everybody knows is Walmart. And, Walmart was started from his name. And so if you think about you're creating a mart or a store off of that person's name, you can always do that a lot when you're doing naming exercises and branding. And if they're tied to their name and if they're not, and if they want to be taken a little bit more seriously, if they think that, for them, this is their perception, not mine. Does just operating under my name make me seem less professional? Does it make me seem like a 1099 versus, like an actual build business, right? And so you have to think about all the ways that that's going to impact your reputation. And then the other part of it too is, are there business partners involved, or will there be? One of the exercises I did a couple years ago was, a real estate company, and it was just his initials, which oftentimes it is. I started as AG Brand and Marketing. Okay. That was my first name because I had no time or space to figure anything out. So I just was rocking and rolling. I founded myself as my initials and blah, blah, blah. It was very boring, and that's what we did. So often you have to think, is there a business partner coming in and saying, look, dude, I don't really want to operate under your initials anymore. Can we come up with something fancy pants? And that's what we did. We rebranded it. So there's a lot of questions involved, and there's a lot of people involved. And sometimes it's just a matter of how you want to grow, how you want to be known, and what you want that reputation to feel like.
Yeah, I love that you took it in the direction of 1099 versus full-fledged company, because that is exactly how I always felt when people were like, who do I write the check to? And I just said, make it out to Brian. It did feel more like I was just a random person they were hiring from Upwork or something. So yeah, I love your overview there. And I also love the realities. Obviously, you work with so many different clients in so many different industries. And you're right, these are just everyday things that we all face, but I feel like we don't talk about enough. So thank you, Anne, for having that conversation in front of listeners. I want to go back to the experience bit a little bit, because the more I visualize, and maybe it's just I'm hungry right now thinking about the smell of pizza, I want to talk more about that brand experience, because your analogy of, hey, your experience with the restaurant starts as soon as you touch that door handle to walk in. Well, in our businesses, it all starts before, when I got my first ever email with you. That starts shaping how I view your energy, the way that you show up through your work, and vice versa. I think that emails actually show a lot about the way that somebody does business. And so I'd love for you to talk about those little experiential points that most businesses, most entrepreneurs, also calling out the solopreneurs, forget about as a reflection of their brand.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And I'm passionate about that. So I jumped on your words there, because it doesn't start when you're going into the business. The brand experience starts from the very first time they're marketed to about your business. So wherever that brand impression is starting, wherever they see a sign or an ad, wherever they hear about it from a friend, wherever they see a write-up in a like a newspaper. I mean, one of the examples is we just went on a date to this Thai restaurant because of one dish that was written up in Westword. And I love what Westword writes about here in Denver. And so for me, I'm going, I have to have that crispy Thai chicken. That sounds like a dream. I want to go. And then sure enough, the whole brand experience was great. It was phenomenal. The whole experience before we even walked in, and the excitement and the salivating that we were doing of thinking about this dish, because we went to Thailand and we absolutely loved the food. And this was from northern Thailand, so it was different, and it is different, and it delivered on what we were excited about, that we read about. And of course, I wrote them a 5-star review after. So, and then we get it for takeout now, because we found out we can get it for $5 delivery fee. So why not, right? So they've built these fans just through something that started in writing. And so you have to think about, when you're building a brand, how are we going to show up for the first time in people's minds? And that restaurant that you're reading through that experience on my website, when you think about, why did you choose to go there? How did you hear about them? Where did you figure out that you wanted to try this place? And that's where that brand reputation and that brand experience begins. And that's what needs to be thought about, I guess, or just started in some form. And that's the beginning, the true beginning. And a lot of times your website is that place. It's your virtual storefront. So you have to be building these websites. And this is a great specialty of mine, is working with your developers or working with the agency who's going to be refreshing or creating from the ground up the website, and making sure that the whole process is really thought through from the user's perspective. So often as business owners, we are in our own head. We know what we want to say. We get it. We're finding this. It's ours, right? But the customer is oftentimes viewing this and experiencing this in quite a different manner. And when that happens, you have to have somebody on your team that says, look, this customer experience is going to be different than how you are showing them to shop you, right? So if you're saying the customer needs to experience it differently, they're not going to go there. They're not going to think to click there to find that information. They're going to think to go through here, or you just need to put it right out in the open for them with a huge button on your homepage, right? So these are just some of the things that you do as kind of the next phase after we do our foundational work. How is everything set up for you virtually and or in real life if you exist somewhere at a location? And then what's really neat is there are people out there that with a restaurant per se would do all that interior design. And I have a friend from college who does all this kind of brand experience designing. She's an interior designer. And she takes that brand visually for places like a restaurant that need to hit on all the brand experience that you want to deliver with your actual vibe and your design in the place too. So thought that goes into all of those elements is the one that's really going to do well. And it's going to have that human connection with people.
Yeah, and you're clearly so passionate about that answer. And again, I love the restaurant analogy because you're right. The story of you reading about that particular dish long before you ever step foot there, it already started shaping it. And I also know that listeners love when I drop a little bit of behind the scenes stuff about how we produce the show. And so I'll share this with you, Anne, because you and I obviously exchanged quite a few emails before our interview here today. And we reach out to quite a few entrepreneurs every single week, asking them if they'd be interested in coming on the show. And you wouldn't believe the inbox. We get some enthusiastic yeses, of course. I'd love to talk to your audience like you and awesome entrepreneurs that we know we found the right ones. But then we also receive emails from like 2-word emails where they're just like, maybe send info. 3 words emails, I guess. And so in those cases, quite frankly, to be fully transparent, we delete them. We never send those potential guests more information. We never want to have them on the show because those simple emails show so much about the way that they show up. It's like when I email a company, maybe I forgot my password or something and I need someone to reset something. There are companies who just say, here's your reset link. And there are companies who'd be like, oh my gosh, all good. We totally get it. There's too many passwords to remember. Here's the link. It's those small things that I love reveal about the way that our brand works. And along those lines, listeners love stories and you work with so many different clients. What are some cool things that either you've implemented or you've seen other businesses doing that you thought, wow, that is so clever. I should implement that in my business?
It's a good question. One of the things that I love that I will say that I suggest to my clients to implement that is so cool and has such a great backstory to it is handwritten thank you notes. I am such a huge advocate of handwritten thank you notes or handwritten notes in general in my life, in my personal life. And that started with my very first job when I was 16 years old. Of course, babysitting was before all that. But when I was 16, I couldn't wait to start working there at Nordstrom. I'm such a shoe fanatic, and I come from a long line of shoe fanatics. And I always wanted to work in the shoe department, which I finally did and realized it wasn't that fun. But my first job in clothing in Nordstrom, they, even at 16 years old, they teach you so many things there and they take care of their employees. But one of the biggest things that you have to nail is customer service. And customer service starts with training on handwriting thank you notes to all of your customers who spend a certain amount with you. Also creating a personal shopper book. So here's this little 16-year-old first job in high school with a personal shopping book and ended up landing John Elway's wife and her children at the time as some of my personal shoppers year after year for our sales. So, and I was 16. And so I think that went to show what kind of skill sets I would bring to business later on in my life, but also having those tools instilled in me at such a young age that was just a part of business. And I think that for me, handwriting thank you notes has always been something that I've done. I sold flooring for floor coverings, or not floor coverings, for Empire Today. And that was one of my first jobs when I was scrounging out of college to make everything work, and worked 2 or 3 jobs at the same time. And I carried a box of thank you cards with me in my car. And after every single appointment, even if I met with 9 people that day and it was long and I was getting home at 11 o'clock at night, I would write a handwritten thank you note with one memorable or personal thing that stood out to me in that meeting with that person right after that appointment, before I went to the next one and got all foggy. And then I would just address them and complete and fill them out with all the other stuff I did for follow-up after. And I was one of the highest leading sales reps in my 20s in the Denver market. And I think it was because of, if you didn't close that sale on the spot, that follow-up from that note landed so much and built relationships where I had people calling me 2 years later. I didn't even sell flooring. I was in some other job and I said, I'm so sorry, I can refer you to a friend. And I think that people, just like what you said, if you get a customer service email back, hey, I need help with my password. If it's kind of snarky, right? Or if it's like a fun, comical voice, there's a human on the other side of it. And sometimes there isn't. Sometimes that is the copywriting of an automatic email reply that makes you feel seen and makes you feel heard, that there is a human on the other end, even though there wasn't. There was a human that did that beautiful copywriting. And so I think that all plays into, what can these businesses do? What are some things that are really cool? It's the businesses that have a forefront of copywriting and know that is a big gift to continue investing money into, and not just having somebody reply back really quick, like you said, with a 3 or 4 word answer. That is a brand experience when you touch point with a customer and with a company on customer service. The thank you notes, if there's a way in your business to find anybody, hire an intern for $10 a note that they write that's in high school. I don't care, somebody who has nice handwriting, and just give them a stack of thank you notes to write. And then even if you just write in a personal blurb on the end of them, they write all the bulk and the meat of what you want them to say about interacting with your business. That stuff goes such a long way. So that is a program that I just want to showcase here, because I think that anybody can figure out a way to implement it that needs to be done.
Heck yes, I love the personal touch. And as a fellow handwritten note lover, that is a strategy that I used so much early on, not only in my businesses, but also in this podcast. I remember when I had basically no listeners in our first 10 episodes, anyone who emailed me, I would send a handwritten note to. And those were the building blocks of creating, here we are 7 years later of this show, a worldwide audience of very loyal fans that I'm super thankful for, by the way. Thank you, listeners. So I love that advice. And you're right, even while using technology, heck, maybe even especially in a high-tech world, the personal element becomes even more important, because it's easier than ever before to automate all of these sexy follow-ups and all of these other things. So be a human in those follow-ups. I love that advice, and I'm going to put you on the spot here, because you know as well as listeners do that there are no pre-planned questions here on the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. But there's one line of questioning that when I studied your work, I was like, I gotta ask Anne about this, because I'm a firm believer that if you ask bad questions, you get bad answers. If you ask good questions, you get good answers. If you ask great questions, you get great answers. And Anne, I know that you've been in branding for a long time. You've seen a lot of people ask average branding questions. What should my colors be? What should my fonts be? Give us some examples of typical questions that you see entrepreneurs asking about their brand, and then reframe those questions. Tell us or reveal to us some of the right questions we should be asking.
Okay. All right. Okay. So a typical question would be, what kinds of shapes do you see in your logo? Right? So if we've already talked about colors, we've already talked about mood, voice, personality, vibe. I use the word vibe a lot. How are people going to feel when they're interacting with you and your brand? And then that's just kind of a generic blah, blah, blah question, right? You're going to have to cover all that. If there's an agency involved, if there is a graphic designer involved, somebody who you have to hand off to. But what I like to do is when we talk about the words that describe your business, one of the meaty questions that I always love asking is, if you are at a bar or a coffee shop and you're overhearing somebody talk about their interaction with your company, what do you hope to hear? And so that really frames it from someone else's perspective. And then they can't say, well, I want to be known for this and that. It's, I want to hear them saying this really stood out to them, or they really enjoyed this interaction with us, or this part of it was so easy, right? Typically when you do what we do, this always is a headache, and we want that part to be easy. So that's one meaty question. And then the next one I want to ask that's different that I ask, and I'm a very abstract thinker, so often I'll go down a rabbit hole, but we will start with the kind of standard strategy questions that I offer. And I've been doing this now for 9 years, so I have a really well-crafted approach to my basic strategy sessions. But then what happens is our initial conversations build for the second one and the third, and you get these really elaborate or really abstract questions because you get more about their background, or you understand what they enjoy talking about, or you can reframe it into something that they haven't thought about. So one of the things I love to ask is, once you've understood their colors, or once you've understood their words, their brand descriptors, then I say, okay, so you want to be humble. So what shape represents the word humble to you and why? Or you're loving teal. Okay, so what shape would represent teal to you? Which is a really weird question. Like, I don't know. That's odd. And then you could go back to the words and say, so you want to be really relatable, and you want to be really connected. So what types of imagery brings that kind of connected and relatable thought that you're having to you? And so people can go off and do anything. They can say, well, I really view a triangle as this because, and then it's just more fuel for my fire of all of my, so we call it the sneaky work of wizardry behind the scenes. So in between our strategy sessions, it's me doing research and building on what you've said, and then really crafting, writing, and building and developing your entire brand foundation off of this. And so the work of the wizards, you have to get into some of these weird questions to see what they give you. And sometimes you get these beautiful images or these things with shapes that I give over to a graphic designer or an agency. And often the feedback that I get after those reviews of all of our meeting notes, which could be like 20 plus pages, and then they get the full brand guidebook, which is the final deliverable I give. And they go through that and say, wow, I can't believe they told you X, right? Like, this is like therapy. Or I can't believe you got all of this out of them. And then they, boom, go right into creating the visual brand from all of this conversation. And the first take of this 2 or 3 logo renditions is like money. The client's like, oh, I love that, because you're getting them to think about what that looks like instead of just a word.
Yeah, I love the intersection of linguistics, which a lot of us love, describing things with visuals, the challenge of marrying the two. And you're right, it can introduce so many different things, so many new thoughts that we wouldn't have by thinking so linearly. So I love that that's part of your approach. And I've got to ask you this, because it's something that stands out to me about the way that you operate within your company at Fix and Form, is that you also mentioned that you help entrepreneurs. You can also teach businesses how to do branding stuff on their own. And to me, looking from the outside in at your business, it makes me want to ask the question of, Anne, what's the importance of us learning, in addition to working with someone like you who can help extract some of these answers that we wouldn't otherwise find within ourselves? What's the importance of understanding this stuff for ourselves? It almost makes me feel like, Anne, do you view brands as something that, a lot of people think, hire a branding agency, do the project, you're done with it? Whereas your approach seems more like, hey, let's always be thinking about this. Tell me about your thoughts on those things.
Yeah. So it's really twofold. One is internal education. So once I've worked with the executive leadership or the founders, the owners, the presidents, these are typically my clients. So they're the ones that are guiding the ship. They have, started this whole business, or they're running the business. So the education on that part of it is we fix and form. So we don't just do all of the fixing. Then we go through, and I will still be with them in the process of teaching, pitching, educating all of the people that are in their brand. So if you think about this was really a hard lesson for me that I learned about 4 or 5 years ago. I would do all of this beautiful work. We would have these amazing breakthroughs. We would be so excited about all of the new direction and the new brand that we've just established. And basically the clients were left to go educate all of their people. Some of them had 20 people on staff. Some of them had hundreds. And they were presenting this guidebook essentially and the new brand direction for me on my behalf. And I'm the brand person. And I thought that was really losing a lot of the value of my brand experience. And so what I started doing and what the rebrand was, the thought behind that in the pandemic, when I was twiddling my thumbs thinking, I really need to do something different with this business of mine, and it shouldn't be AG brand and marketing anymore. And so where Fix and Form came from was the idea of, I'm going to do all the fixing with you, and then I'm also going to do all the forming with you. And so I'm going to be presenting if they want me to, or alongside them, and answering those questions and being that brand expert for them in teaching all of the staff, the salespeople especially, who are going to be selling this, right? These are all the people on your ship that are having to deliver this brand experience that we've just formed to your world of customers. So why would I leave anybody else to do that? So that's one part to it, is the form is I will literally do a lunch and learn or a happy hour workshop, or literally come in for a full business meeting once we have done this work, and then present it and educate and tell your employees why this is so important for the future of the business and what our work has just uncovered for all of them and why they need to get on board and how they can get on board. And this goes down to simple things like directives, right? So we have new taglines. Obviously, we have a new name, or we have a new mission and a vision. So our taglines, we're going to now be putting this tagline under everybody's email signature. So that kind of stuff needs to change, right? When you change your brand, you have to think about what elements need to go where. In all of your bios where you're showing up as representing our company, this is the language that you need to use. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into rebranding for the owners, my clients, who don't think about, well, how this is such a big undertaking. How do I then teach everybody in our business? And so I always say there's two brands. There's internal brand, which is the culture and the employees and the internal brand of your company. And then there's the external brand, which is everything that you all deliver outside to the customers and the people who are going to buy what you're selling. And then the second part to that is I used to do a lot of teaching at General Assembly, and I did a lot of mentorship with Modern Guild. And I love teaching high school and college students who are kind of figuring out what they want to do. Just being a mentor for them in terms of that direction, because heck, for me, when I was in high school, I was going to go to school for dance and be a dancer. And then it shifted to acting and directing because that was a little more serious for my parents. And then from there, it was, no, it needs to be something business related. So in a way, it was a shared dream, but it also guided me to a really cool new spot of branding and business marketing. But so what I love to do is create either just a general branding workshop. Usually startup incubators love this too. I worked a lot in some of those when I lived in Austin, and just did some branding workshops for all those incubators who needed to deliver some brand foundation elements and knowledge to people starting businesses. But also it could be a customized brand workshop for a company or a business or an agency who's trying to allow everybody to learn a little bit more about the branding space and the strategic stuff, and then how to deliver that to what they're doing, whether they're starting a business or whether they're working on growing clients.
Heck yeah, Anne, you are obviously incredible at what you do, and I love all these real life client stories. But in addition to that, I love how you practice what you preach. Listeners, pay attention to how Anne didn't just answer that question. She, in that answer, not only gave value, but also explained the birth of her own brand, Fix and Form. I can see you during the pandemic sitting down and making these big decisions. So Anne, I love that part of your story. Also love that you used a story story to illustrate that answer for us. So many golden nuggets inside of that answer, as I promised at the top of today's episode. But Anne, as we come towards the end of this interview, before I open the stage for you to tell listeners where the heck to go learn more about you and what you do, because listeners, success leaves clues. You want to see what Anne is doing. And I want to, again, I'm going to put you on the spot. I feel like I'm putting you on the spot because I trust like you have so much experience in this. But what are two things? We talked about websites, we talked about handwritten notes, we talked about customer experience, we talked about putting your personality into the things that you do. What are two actionable things that listeners, bearing in mind so many of them are solopreneurs, maybe earlier on in their journey, maybe they've already hit 10K a month in their business, but they want to reach that next level. What are two things that they must and should and could focus on that are actionable?
Such a good question, Brian. Okay, so I would say the first thing to focus on would be auditing how you're showing up and where. So example would be conduct your own audit of where is my business listed? Where am I located? Do I have a Facebook page, Instagram? Do I want to be on TikTok? Do I not? Do I have a website? Do I have business cards? How am I going to get those to people? So you're kind of conducting your own little audit of where you're showing up and how is that looking. And you could also kind of use your friends and family if you're just starting out as a little mini focus group. And you could say, hey, where am I showing up for you? If you were to do a Google search on this business name, if you're already there, if you have a business, and it could just be your name, right? And so where are you finding me and how is it coming across? And this is something that never stops, by the way. I actually just met a referral for the first time who's a copywriter who I hope to partner with soon on client work and refer back and forth with. And I just said, I really love your approach to everything and I love your vibe. Can you please go to my website now that you know more about me and just browse through it real quick and give me your take on my vibe. And if you think that it's really still representing who you just met and what you heard me talk so passionately about with what I do. And so I think that success for a business owner starts at that point of asking people to help you along the way with something that simple of where you're showing up and how they're kind of receiving it. And if that's what you want. And so if not, that's something that needs to be changed. And so just kind of checking in often of where that's happening. I'm in my 9th year of doing this as my own business owner, and I still ask for that feedback loop and asking people who I trust and get a good vibe with of their feedback. And so that would be one. Number two, I would say really think about the kind of customer or client that you want to work with and where you're best going to find them. Now, sometimes that could be a quantity thing and sometimes that could be a quality thing. So if you're really needing a lot of high traffic leads and volume for what it is that you're doing, then it probably needs to be some type of a paid placement, paid search, paid lead gen type of thing. If it needs to be more organic or that funnel needs to be slower, and you could really start building on those relationships. Since the pandemic, so much of business networking is virtual. Heck, I have 3 kids. The 5 to 7 time frame for me doesn't work anymore. So I never show up anywhere. So I'm a part of a lot of networking groups that are all virtual and kind of come at your own time. I teach webinars on some of them and they're all recorded. So you watch it at your own time. You don't have to be here live. So finding those places that you can plug in early and really connect with people who would be your competitors too. Finding those people, you shouldn't avoid them. You should find those people to really start talking about the same kind of services that you're doing, but also networking for potential customers and clients, and then also networking for those businesses who can lift you up and support you, and then you can become referral partners. That should be done early.
Heck yes. And that is a very unique piece of advice that I actually don't think I've heard from anyone, to have your friends and family do a brand audit for you, essentially, of where you're showing up. That's actually fun, and it makes me want to do it. And for so many of us entrepreneurs, it answers the question. I don't know if you get this from family members. What exactly do you do? It's fun to have other people look it up and tell us what we do, because that'll show so much about the way that we show up. That might be one of my favorite pieces of advice in all these interviews that we've had. Yeah. Exactly. No, that's fantastic. I love that piece of advice, and that's awesome. You've shared so much with us here today. I know that listeners, obviously, I've just been stealing from your website for examples today. The restaurant example is so good, so listeners will definitely want to go check out your work. So, Anne, before we wrap up, tell listeners where they should go to follow you, what you're doing, and check out Fix and Form.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. So you can find all of the work of my business at fixandform.com. On Instagram, I'm known as That Branding Girl, because that's often how people refer to me as, or refer me on to others. Hey, Anne, That Branding Girl. So it's That Branding Girl, which is representing Fix and Form. And then my personal, everything else is really just personal. So Anne, Anne, Gillaspie, Gillaspie. Just Google and it'll come up. My main account that I post on is Instagram, but of course, there's always emailing. So it's Anne, Anne, at fixandform.com.
Heck yes. I always love when guests come on here and drop their email addresses. It's something I love doing to this day. Every listener knows how to get a hold of me. So Anne, I thank you so much, not only for sharing in everything that you do, but of course for coming on today to the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. This has been so much fun. I appreciate it.